Ever wondered what really goes on behind those cockpit doors? Well, today we're launching into Captain Jeremy Burfoot's The Secret Life of Flying for a deep dive into the airline industry.
It's a world most of us just glide through, never seeing the organized chaos below the surface.
Yeah, Burfoot really throws you right onto the tarmac with that controlled chaos, as he calls it. He compares a short turnaround, when a plane lands and they have to get it ready for the next flight ASAP to, get this, a Formula One pit stop.
It's a brilliant analogy, actually. The same intense choreography, the split-second timing, the absolute reliance on each team member knowing their role perfectly, except instead of a race car, it's this massive airliner.
And he's got this great bit about audits, too. You know how airlines get audited for efficiency? Apparently, there are ways they get creative when those audits are happening, all about keeping those planes moving. Makes you wonder.
Well, yeah, it makes you think about the pressures they're under. I mean, on one hand, yeah, efficiency is key, but passenger safety, that can't be compromised.
For sure, for sure. And speaking of things that can make or break a flight, the whole fuel thing blew my mind. I never realized how much temperature plays into it.
Oh, it's huge. You'd think, full tank, let's go. But it's not that simple. Hot day, you might need to actually carry less fuel because of how weight affects takeoff.
Wait, really? Less?
Yeah, or sometimes even more on a long haul if it's scorching. Burfoot uses the A380 as an example. Can you imagine? 320,000 liters of fuel? That's what, 256 tons? Just for one flight. It's mind-boggling how they calculate all that.
That's wild. It makes you realize, every liter counts.
Absolutely. And it's not just about getting from A to B. It's a legal thing too, right?
Yeah.
They have to meet these strict regulations for minimum fuel reserves based on the route, the weather, a whole bunch of factors.
Safety first, for sure. Speaking of which, the boarding process. Oh boy, Burfoot's take on that. The arrogance-dumbness spectrum of late passengers. I was cracking up.
We've all been that person stuck in line watching someone struggle to stuff their oversized bag into the overhead bin. But he's onto something with that observation.
Totally. And it's not just about the annoyance factor either. He talks about how our seat choice actually plays into the bigger safety picture. Statistically, you've got better odds at the back of the plane if there's an incident.
Right. We think about legroom, maybe snagging a window view, but those decisions have more weight than we realize.
Makes you think. Though I'm not sure I'm ready to give up my aisle seat just yet.
Fair enough. But that's where the cabin crew come in. Their job's not just about the peanuts and the safety demo. Burfoot really highlights their role as essentially our lifeline in a crisis. Their training is intense, and rightly so.
Yeah, those folks deal with it all. Serving drinks, handling cranky passengers, and on top of that, they're trained to handle any kind of emergency. Hats off to them.
Absolutely. Burfoot's got some hilarious stories about their experiences, but it's clear those jobs demand a special kind of resilience. The airline industry, it's all about managing expectations, and that can be a wild ride.
No kidding. So before we even leave the gate, there's this whole hidden world of logistics, pressure, and split-second decisions happening. It's pretty amazing when you stop to think about it. It's mind-blowing, isn't it? All that's going on before we even take off. But let's get this show, or should I say this plane, in the air. What happens when we reach cruising altitude with Captain Burfoot?
Well, buckle up, because it's more than just those breathtaking views and the little bags of pretzels. Burfoot, he takes us right into the cockpit, dissects stuff we take for granted, ever thought about those pilot announcements?
You mean besides hoping they don't mention turbulence?
Exactly. There's an art to it. It's imagine if they just casually announced, folks, running a bit low on lift over here, or just gonna hit this wing disconnect button, be right back.
Okay, I'd be hitting the call button for sure.
Right. Burfoot uses these hilarious examples, but the point is serious. Up there, communication, it's got to be clear, concise, no room for misinterpretation. It's as vital as any instrument panel.
They're not just pilots, they're like air traffic controllers of our nerves up there. Speaking of which, how about in-flight entertainment? I mean, it's come a long way, but Burfoot kind of bursts that bubble a bit, doesn't he?
Yeah, we're all glued to our screens, but he talks about how those miles of wiring, they're a potential fire hazard. He even brings up that Swissair Flight 111 crash, how faulty wiring might have been involved. Suddenly, that movie doesn't seem so important.
Sobering for sure, though I gotta admit, I still get sucked into those seatback screens. But hey, on a lighter note, those winglets, those little wingtips they put on planes now, I always thought they were just for looks.
Right. They look sleek, but they're not just for show. Burfoot, he breaks it down, how those things reduce drag, improve fuel efficiency, all by dealing with these mini tornadoes that form at the wingtips Wingtip vortices, they call them.
Hold on, so those contrails, those white lines we see in the sky, that's related to those mini tornadoes.
Yep, it's all connected. Burfoot, he's got a knack for taking these complex physics things and making them, like, actually understandable.
Speaking of understandable, how about everyone's favorite airplane food? He does not hold back, does he? Overheated plastic tubs of despair, I think was the quote.
He's brutal, but he's also right. And he explains why. See, the air pressure, the humidity, it messes with our taste buds. So that pasta that looks so good in the brochure, it's fighting a losing battle.
So it's not just bad catering, it's science conspiring against us.
Exactly. Though I think Burfoot would argue some airlines, they could still try a little harder. He's got some thoughts on those celebrity chef tie-ins too. Let's just say he's not impressed.
I'll have to take his word for it. On that note, I'm going to stick with my usual pre-flight snack. But what about drinks? Is it true what they say about alcohol hitting you faster at altitude?
It is, and it's not just about getting tipsy quicker. Burfoot explains that with the lower oxygen levels up there, our bodies, they just process alcohol differently. So that mini bottle of wine, maybe pace yourself.
Good advice. Those mini bottles always get me thinking about another tiny marvel of air travel airplane toilets. Burfoot really delves into their history, and it's surprisingly interesting.
Right. You'd never think about it, but those things are like engineering feats. He talks about how the vacuum technology, it revolutionized those systems, made them smaller, more efficient.
And of course, he addresses those colorful urban legends about the vacuum suction too. Let's just say those warning stickers are there for a reason.
Absolutely. But jokes aside, he makes you realize those seemingly mundane things, they're essential for a comfortable and, let's face it, a hygienic flight. It's all part of the bigger picture of what makes air travel, well, bearable.
You know, with all this talk about the ins and outs of flying, it's easy to forget. Some people, they get a little anxious about it. I mean, I've been there.
Oh, absolutely. It's totally normal. And Burfoot, he actually admits it. He's got his own fears. Spiders, snakes, even sharks. All fair game, apparently. Nothing to do with flying, but still.
See, even pilots get the jitters. Makes you feel a bit better. And speaking of things that can make a flight less than enjoyable jet lag, man, it's not just being tired, is it? It's like your whole body is out of whack.
It's that internal clock, he describes it, totally messed up. Imagine, especially for those long-haul pilots, constantly crossing time zones. Sleep shot, your hormones go haywire. It's not just a minor inconvenience, it can have real health impacts long-term.
Makes you want to pack some extra sleep masks and earplugs for sure.
Yeah.
And you know what else people worry about? Germs. Those tiny enclosed spaces, everyone breathing the same air. It's a recipe for a cold or worse, right?
Right, you'd think so. But Burfoot, he actually breaks down the science, and it's not as bad as you might imagine.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those HEPA filters everyone's talking about these days, on planes, they're the real deal. Like 99% of those nasty particles gone. Plus, the air is getting completely replaced every few minutes, more often than most office buildings.
Well, that's reassuring at least. Maybe I won't wear a mask on my next flight then again. But of course, there's one thing we can't control, no matter how much hand sanitizer we use, and that's the weather.
Talk about a wild card.
Yeah.
And Burfoot, he really gets into it here. Wind, turbulence, thunderstorms, he describes how they affect everything. From fuel efficiency to, like, the actual flight path.
He even said sometimes wind can be a good thing.
Right.
Like a headwind during takeoff can actually help the plane get off the ground faster. Who knew?
Right, there's a whole science to it. We just see the clouds out the window, but those pilots up front, they're constantly analyzing, calculating, making decisions based on a million factors.
And that whole thing about icing too. I mean, I knew it was a thing, but he talks about freezing rain, how it can be a nightmare for pilots.
Yeah.
Makes you realize, like, what we see as passengers, it's just the, what do they say, the tip of the iceberg.
Totally. He even brings up that Qantas Flight 72 incident. Remember that one? Computer glitch, plane nosedives multiple times. It's scary to think about, but it highlights something crucial.
What's that?
Even with all our fancy tech, autopilot, all that, sometimes it's still the humans who save the day. That pilot, he managed to regain control, land that plane safely. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
For sure, for sure. Technology can only take us so far, right?
Mhm.
So where does that leave us? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here, or should I say air miles.
Right. We've seen the meticulous planning, the engineering marvels, even those tiny airplane toilets. But Burfoot, he leaves us with a final thought, and it's a big one. What about the things we haven't anticipated yet?
Just kind of humbling, isn't it? We've come so far, but There's always something new, something we haven't even considered.
Exactly. And maybe that's okay. A little bit of mystery keeps things interesting, right?
I guess so. So the next time you're boarding a flight, take a moment to think about all the things happening behind the scenes, the people, the technology, the sheer complexity of it all. It's a pretty incredible feat when you really stop to consider it. Safe travels, everyone.